Will Australia ever become a football nation? In your words, soccer. Now, back in 2005, the Socceroos took a huge leap forward. It'll be interesting to see if it does start rising the ranks, because it is a brilliant sport with a few flaws. Well, I hope you enjoy the video. If you do, like and subscribe. Let's go.
Where were you on November 16, 2005? Ask any Australian football fan that question, and they'll be able to give you a detailed rundown of their every move.
From what I remember, I was on a football pitch. What a night it was. What an experience for Australian football. 6 of us flew to Sydney. I remember we had lunch at a nice restaurant, got to the ground nice and early, picked our spot, had a few beers.
I flew to Sydney for the game. I had to go. We were going to qualify.
I was in probably row Z.
Me, well, after skipping school, I stood here for hours on end, holding these very signs. So many cars beeped their horns, the police turned up.
I remember just watching the whole game with my old man. My mum kicked us out of the living room. There was no way she was watching football.
But nothing was going to faze me or any other Australian football fan, because after more than 3 decades, Australia were finally going to qualify for the World Cup and truly experience what the beautiful game can do.
I tell you what I find quite interesting, that if you're in Australia and you are a football fan, you call it football. You don't call it soccer. I find that really interesting, and actually it's nice. I really like it that football fans know it's football. You know, I understand why others call, Aussie rules, why they would call it footy. And I understand why American football, they call it football. But it is really fantastic to see that if you're an Australian football fan, you call it football rather than soccer. I think that's brilliant.
No matter what sport you followed, I'm pretty sure people watch that game.
One of those days, one of those nights that will live in the memory forever.
Watching that match was just unbearable.
It was just down to Johnny, really, to do what he does.
We're all in the huddle. It was like silence.
I don't think I was even watching, to be honest.
You could arguably say the future of football in Australia hinged upon it.
4-2. Aloisi for us. John. Here's Aloisi for a place in the World Cup.
So where were you on the 16th of November 2005? Do you remember this game? Do you remember where you were and what you were doing? Did you watch this game? Bearing in mind this is a world competition. Now granted, this was, I assume, to qualify. But this is different. This is different to rugby. This is different to, obviously, Aussie rules. This is a world sport. You know, the likes of Brazil, England, Spain, Portugal, even the United States, Canada. Every country can be involved in this sport, unlike any other.
If you think about it, Australia should have always been a footballing nation. A country built on migrant communities who love the game. We excelled at every sport we ever turned our hand to.
We have had this...
Whoa, all right. All right, blow your own trumpet, why don't you?
It's an extraordinary rate of success in a whole range of sports, whether it's at the Olympic Games, cricket and rugby, incredible success, tennis as well.
Yet despite all the success in these sports, football down under was a laughingstock.
Football has a tradition here of being picked on. It's a form of bullying in a way.
I can tell you American football, soccer, is picked on more, because they are a joke.
Instances where Australian rules football supporters would spread glass on soccer fields to sabotage the pitch.
Our game here in Australia was not as easily accessible as AFL was or rugby league was.
Certainly in terms of the media, it didn't exist, or it barely existed.
The game was basically treated as not even a third-tier sport. Well, it's the game that the migrants play. We just put a little story at the end or a little paragraph in the paper.
You'd never...
How interesting is that? He said it's a game that the migrants play. Bearing in mind, a lot of Australia are migrants. So how does that make sense? That seems a really strange concept. That seems a really strange concept that... Just the dog. It seems a really strange concept that it would be seen as a migrant sport when most of the country is now migrants, if that makes sense.
See football on the news or advertisements at all. It's all rugby, cricket.
We grew up knowing that our game, and we truly believed our game was the best in the world because it was throughout the rest of the world. And why couldn't it be here in Australia?
It's never really captured the imagination of, I think, the Australian mainstream.
It wasn't too long ago that Socceroos could hardly get a half-full stadium.
Tim Cahill could have walked down the high street in Sydney and not been recognised. That's how bad it was.
But this...
And basically, even over in England, we know who Tim Cahill is. Tim Cahill was a fantastic player. To think that he wouldn't even be recognised walking down the street in Australia, that's madness.
It wasn't just another story of football failing to make its mark on a non-footballing nation. The manner in which the Socceroos continued to struggle was at times unbelievable. So much so that Fox Sports pundit Adam Peacock has written a book on it. Adam, how crazy does this story get?
Yeah, pretty crazy. The Socceroos, over 32 years, found new ways to stuff things up.
7 failed qualifications in a row.
Yep. 77 was like, oh yeah, we'll just continue on, we'll qualify again. Didn't happen. 81, they brought in a German coach. He didn't.
Oh. To lose to Kuwait in 77, Kuwait. Wow.
Work. 85 was tough because we played Scotland. And the Socceroos played pretty well that night, but got a 0-0. Wasn't enough. We're out again.
89, it was to Israel?
Yes, we fell at the first stage. Really bad result in New Zealand. New Zealand. Come back, have to get a win against Israel. It doesn't go our way.
It was one heartbreak after another.
1993, a little bloke called Maradona was our opponent, so that wasn't easy. They were just that little bit better. They won the game and got through with it.
Sadly, Argentina are always a powerhouse in football, and yeah, Maradona. Yeah. Surely even the Aussies know who Maradona is and the quality he had.
Thought, this is never going to happen. This is just simply never going to happen.
I started following the Socceroos the moment we failed to qualify in Melbourne in 97.
1997.
That's a swear word, Iran.
Australian
football.
I refused to watch any video from the game. It was too traumatic.
We would just
lose it. So this is the funny thing. So some of these countries, when, for example, Iran, there is no reason to be losing to Iran, surely. Iran is not a team that I would... Yeah, they've got football, but it's not a team I would think of as a strong footballing country. And even Australia would be good enough to beat Iran, but clearly not.
Destroying Iran. We were 2-0 up. The radio commentator said, pack your bags, we're going to France.
And when we were 2-0 up, I was still on the bench thinking that we're going to go to the World Cup.
I had already booked games in France.
But it just all went wrong in 5 minutes.
Some guy runs on and for his 5 minutes of fame.
A guy by the name of Peter Hoare, who's known as a serial pest, he decided to run onto the pitch and pull the net down. Delay, 10 minutes, momentum.
What an idiot.
You just got that sense that it just didn't quite feel right.
All of a sudden, Iran scored 2 goals, and before we knew it, we were out.
It was actually the first time I've ever seen my dad cry.
You couldn't quite comprehend what had happened and how it had happened.
You just feel for them, not just the boys, they are representative of so many people who make this game their life. It's just, I can't say anything. Right?
Well, the Socceroos knew the road to the World Cup would be long and hard. They found out today just how long and hard it could be.
In 2001, we had Uruguay. 4 million people, but 4 million football nuts. They got off the planes, they are met firstly by customs who say, I need to check all your boots. No real reason, just to tick them off.
And then they had to endure an extremely hostile welcome. Players were jostled.
There was loads of people just channeling the bus, swearing at us, spitting at us.
You got spat on?
I did. I caught one, I think, on my arm.
I ended up playing with Uruguayans after, and they said, you know, they pay people to come to the airport to abuse us a little bit. That's just, you know, making sure that we know that we're in their country and they're going to make it hard for us. In that game there, we let the fans get to us a little bit.
And that's a funny one as well, because Uruguay, they are known as a footballing nation, and they've always been there or thereabouts. Why would they feel the need to do that against Australia, who aren't known as a good footballing team?
3-0, that was the end of it. 60,000 people at the Centenario going absolutely berserk.
The one thing I'll never forget is Tony Vidmar in tears after the game.
That image of him bawling his eyes out, every Australian fan felt the same.
Believe it or not, many attribute the Socceroos' run of bad luck to a bizarre little incident that happened in Mozambique during a qualification match in 1969.
There was a curse put on the Socceroos team because they failed to pay a spiritual witch doctor, and so There was bad luck for us for the next however many 30 years or so.
That curse was supposedly the theory behind why they kept failing in these, 4 yearly attempts to get to the World Cup.
But believe it or not, football in this country faced far more sinister obstacles than witchcraft and curses, as mainstream Australia continued to hold a toxic mentality towards anyone who loved the game.
So here's a question for you. If you're not necessarily a football fan and you're from Australia, do you hold football as a lesser sport, as maybe a sport that's not worthy of Australian time? If so, I think that's a real shame because, like I said, football is the world sport.
A fair old dollop of racism in this country when it comes to football. When in fact, of course, as we know, football's been played in Australia since the 1880s. But because the migrants essentially formed the National Soccer League, the perception of mainstream Australia became that this was a game that somehow didn't belong to Australia. It was a foreign game.
But once again, as I said before, Australia is made up of migrants. So, you can't say it's a migrant sport when you are all migrants except the indigenous.
It was Sheila's Wogs and Poofters.
Ironically, that term was made famous by a white Anglo-Saxon Australian from the Aussie suburbs of South Sydney. His name was Johnny Warren, and he was a hero of mine and anyone who fought for the game.
Sheila's is Australian slang for women. Wogs is for European migrants. And Poofters, well, I think we all know that.
It resonated hugely with football fans in Australia.
Johnny Warren is basically the closest...
Sorry, did you just see the fly that landed on his face and he didn't even bat it away? Jesus.
...thing to a saint Australian football has.
The start of his adult life was falling in love with the game and the world that underpinned the game, and the majority of his adult life thereafter was trying to bash the door down in Australia.
Johnny Warren had the vision for the game bigger than anyone dared to dream of. He understood its interconnectedness with the wider world.
Johnny Warren captures what we're all about.
Cool.
Why's that?
The dream.
Look how emotional he's getting.
I remember...
Oh man, that sucks, knowing that that's how much he cared and then they finally qualified the year later. Oh man, that's horrible.
Les Murray on SBS saying Johnny Warren's passed away, and I felt like I'd lost my dad, felt like I'd lost a grandfather, felt like he was part of the family for football fans.
I told you so, they're the famous words associated to Johnny Warren, as in, I told you so, look at football, look at what it can be.
The I told you so message was Johnny's great, unshakable belief that soccer would eventually be, I suppose, the #1 or most popular game in Australia.
In 2005 came around and Australia had another World Cup qualification playoff, and again it was against Uruguay. But this time the stakes were even higher. After decades of failed attempts at creating a popular national league, the Hyundai A-League was formed with proper backing and organisation. All it needed was genuine public interest.
The government...
Straight away you can see there is interest. Those stadiums that it just showed, there was plenty of people in there. I think that was what was it? That was what stadium? The ANZ. There's clearly people there, clearly people interested. Football has an amazing atmosphere at stadiums as well. It's such a good sport to watch at a stadium.
With the help of the local Olympic Committee, got hold of a gentleman called Frank Lowy. They came in and basically turned the sport on its head. The A-League comes in, there were no ethnic ties to any of the clubs. They brought in advertising gurus, identified the fact that you need one team in each city.
What people forget is that the new league desperately needed the socceroos to give them a turbo boost by qualifying for the World Cup as well.
I remember reading the newspaper at the time and the headline said, "Soccer's last roll of the dice," and it really felt that way because you just knew, you could just feel that football in Australia couldn't deal on the domestic front and international front with another failed World Cup qualification. John Safran, a famous comedian in Australia, was taking no chances, returning to Mozambique to lift the curse on behalf of the Socceroos.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely. There was a TV show about it, Reverse the Curse.
Somebody had to go take that voodoo hex off.
So that's what he did. He went around the world trying to find, the antidote to this curse that had been placed on the socceroos.
Well, I've said, I love the socceroos, but I'm not sure if I'd go to Mozambique and have chicken blood poured on me.
Although we lost 1-0, we had that confidence and that self-belief that we'd be able to overturn that result when we came back here to Sydney.
We just thought it was our time, and every player just believed that this was the time that we're going to go to the World Cup.
There was all kinds of stories going on about we got the charter flight back from Uruguay. The Uruguayans had to get the commercial flight, so they were back in 67B licking their kneecaps in economy and things like that. So there was this edge. There's this amazing edge to the game, like only great football matches, great football occasions can really bring.
What I remember mostly was just there was a lot of nervous tension.
Sydney that day was a special place to be.
The whole lead up to the game, we had 80,000 people singing for the hour beforehand. It was quite incredible.
The Uruguayans, they wanted to make it tough for us. And I heard a bit of ruckus behind me.
Richard Morales, the big Uruguayan striker, decided to go up to Tony Popovic and just start a fight basically. Stood on his foot and kicked his calf.
In the tunnel?
Yeah.
That's news to me.
No, it kicked off.
Before it even... how many incidents?
I know.
If you think that's bad, you should look at the Premier League in England from, say, the early 2000s, late 90s. Just for instance of Man United versus Arsenal rivalries, and it all used to kick off in the tunnel before the game.
That's why I wrote a book on it. There's so many. I think their rationale was, let's pick the biggest, baddest looking guy. If we can get on top of him, we can get on top of anyone here. So they went and picked him, and Popper stood up for himself. And then it finishes, and then they start walking out. And they're like the school kids who have got away with the fight on the backtrack.
It all happened in the tunnel.
I remember early on them having the upper hand. So we were a bit under the pump.
Eventually our boys sort of rode out the storm. We started getting on top, and then Kewell came on after half an hour.
Popovic elbowed, bang, in the head, Recoba. Red card, every day of the week. For some unknown reason, the Spanish referee goes yellow.
And Goose didn't want to risk going down to 10 men. So Goose decided to put Harry Kewell on.
Kewell came on, the game changed.
Harry Kewell. If you're in England, you know who Harry Kewell is because he played for Liverpool. A good player. So it's not like you didn't have good players that were capable.
He had an air swing, but it was the most delicious mishit in the history of Australian football because waiting right there in the box, Mark Bresciano.
And I saw Bresh start to swing at the ball. I'm going, you beauty.
That was a scuff.
The place just went off. It was unbelievable.
I still don't know how he still want to run somewhere. How can you just stand up and do...
Craig Foster.
That's a dread. If you score a goal, you run to the fans. And I think what you actually don't realise is that because football is a low-scoring game, I think with other sports, rugby and Aussie rules, for example, because it is a high-scoring game, maybe every time that a team scores, it's the level of the crowd doesn't get as high because it happens so often, and maybe that score is dampened down. In football, though, because it is a low-scoring game, if a goal goes in, that might be the only goal of the game. And being in a stadium, and I've been in plenty, being in a stadium, the fans erupt. And it changes the atmosphere of the game completely. It could be very stale, and then all of a sudden a goal goes in, wham, up there. So I can appreciate when that goal went in, I bet the crowd went insane.
It had pretty much gone, or midway through the second half. He was actually physically applauding every good pass that the Australians made, and I was having to grab his hands to keep him quiet. He was essentially a fan in the commentary box.
It was fantastic, but there was still, as we found out, a fair bit of drama to come, 90 minutes and then penalties.
I turned around to my brother that night and I said, we've got Schwarzer in goals. These are some of the best players we've ever seen in this country. And he goes, yeah, we're going to win.
It was basically down to who was going to, hold their nerve from 11 metres.
I've said this before and I'll say this again, but a penalty shootout, if you're a neutral, is one of the best ways and most exciting ways to end a match. If you're not a neutral and you're supporting one of the teams, it is covering your eyes sort of moment. It's like, I can't watch. It's it is really tough and nerve-wracking to watch a penalty shootout if you're following one of the teams.
It's Harry Kewell against Fabian Carini.
Harry said, I want to take the first one. I want to get us off to a good start.
First penalty, Australia.
And Schwarzer, amazing save.
Good save.
What sticks in my mind is just his big palm. It's just this one big palm coming across, and he just gets up, gives it the big come on. From there, it was just like, we have to win it.
The Duke's up, the V Bombers up. You know, here we go. He scores this, then if they miss the next one, we're through.
Viduka. Oh, he's put it wide.
He must have taken the
Mark
worst penalty of his
Viduka.
life.
Your heart just sinks.
Zalazeta steps up, and Schwarzer comes up with one of the best saves you're ever likely to see.
Oh, great save with the reaching up arm.
Aloisi the chance to step up and be the man.
What were you feeling when he lined it up?
Oh, shitting myself.
I'm thinking, please God.
I don't think I was even watching, to be honest.
It was just down to Johnny, really.
Exactly what I was saying. If your team is taking the penalty shootout, it is so difficult to watch and nerve-wracking. It's a different experience all on itself. I think until you experience it, and you don't get this in other sports, you know, not many other sports have a sort of a penalty shootout. It is on another level, guys, honestly.
To do what he does.
But the beauty of it was, John Aloisi is the coolest man in the stadium.
Well, the day before practice penalties, Gus made everyone take a penalty. I stayed behind and practiced 5 penalties. They all hit on the same side with Lucas Nil and Ante Kovic was in goals. And Lucas asked me, why did I hit it all the same side? And I said, well, if it goes to a penalty shootout tomorrow, I'm only going to be getting one chance.
The fans were sucking the ball into the net.
I can still remember like the commentary in my head from Simon Hill and Craig Foster. They were like confused as to whether or not we were actually going to win it or not.
I was total blank.
But if John Aloisi can
Just
score
had to
this
score.
goal,
You know, more or less trying to convince myself as much as anybody else. And we had a producer in the box with us, and I sort of poked him as I was saying this.
Are you sure?
trying to do one now, so I can hardly...
4-2.
And he turned around and had a moment of blind panic, and just as he gave me the thumbs up, Johnny was stepping back to go, you know, for the kick, and I said,
Here's Aloisi for a place in the World Cup.
For us.
He's scored! Australia have done it!
We just ran, we celebrated, the whole bench ran on, and what a feeling it was. I didn't know the guy next to me, but I was hugging him.
You just don't get the same excitement, and I'm sure if you're not a football fan, you will disagree, but you just don't get the same excitement in any other sport after winning a penalty shootout in a major competition. You just see a line of players, and then the subs bench and managers coming on. The crowds go crazy. There is nothing else like it. This is the good side of football. This is the amazing, passionate side of football. There is nothing else like it. There really isn't. And I can understand the excitement and passion that these players and fans would have had.
The longest penalty celebration in the history of world football. Johnny ran the whole length of the field.
That was actually planned the day before. If I did score, I'd run to where my family was. The taking off the top wasn't planned.
Don't throw your jumper away, don't throw your jumper away. It was the most amazing feeling.
Craig Foster's like in the corner just going, yes! Yes!
Fonzie loses his shit, let's be honest. Yeah. He screamed the name, Johnny Warren.
Johnny Warren!
I'm sure he didn't mean
Look at the
to say
crowds.
it, but it just came out. He would have been the happiest man in that place.
That shootout, those saves, that penalty kick, it all changed after that.
It was probably the best thing that could happen for football in this country.
I remember being proud to be able to wear a Socceroos shirt to school. We'd made it. We were amongst the big boys.
It catapulted football to the next stratosphere here.
There's all these new ways of looking at football, and I just think that people now, it's just part of your daily life.
The A-League, we've got average crowds of 14,000, which is almost on par with rugby league.
We've qualified for every World Cup since. The Matildas, the women's national team, have won the Asian Cup.
Can I just stress, the names, the Socceroo and then the Matildas, you've got to get rid of that. You've got to get rid of that because, in my opinion anyway, I think it almost belittles the team, in my opinion. I think it comes across quite like, you know, like it's not taken seriously, in my opinion anyway.
We've got a team that's won the Asian Champions League in the Western Sydney Wanderers, and we've won the Asian Cup on home soil.
Again, another night this country stood up and announced itself that Australian football is evolving even further.
Everyone's always said that football is a sleeping giant, and I think we'll show that whether it takes 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now. I truly believe, and there's a lot of believers here in Australia, that football will be the #1 sport here.
November 16 is a day for all Australians, Sheilas, Wogs, Poofters and everyone in between. November 16 is Stadium Australia to Edmundston Road. November 16 is the day that Australia became a footballing nation, and the day that Johnny Warren's words, "I told you so," finally rang true.
Well, there you go. Tell me what you think. If you're not a football fan, tell me why. Tell me what you think. If you are an Aussie football fan, what does this mean to you? What does football mean to? How does it make you feel? Now, I know football has so many problems. Trust me, I know how many problems. You'll see on my channel the amount of issues I've brought up. But remember, football is a world sport that you can play. You can play with a bottle. As a football. On a dust patch, you can play football everywhere, and it means a lot to everyone. Not everyone, sorry. It means a lot to a lot of people. I hope you enjoyed the video, and actually, I learned something there because I never realised the sort of the change in Australian football. It's an interesting one. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time.